Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
What is Donald Trump talking about?
But why are we supporting a country, $200 billion plus a year? Our military is at their disposal. All of these other things, they should be a state. That's why I told Trudeau when he came down.
It all started with a social media post. A joke, or so some people suggested at the time. But then there was another, and another, and another, and another after that. And now it has become a regular occurrence. Donald Trump has been regularly referring to Canada as the 51st U.S. state, and Justin Trudeau as governor. Governor Trudeau, not Prime Minister Trudeau. On Tuesday, during a press conference at Mar-a-Lago, Trump made his most detailed comments yet about his vision for Canada to join the Union.
So I said to him, well, why are we doing it? He said, I don't really know. He was unable to answer the question, but I can answer it. We're doing it because of habit, and we're doing it because we like our neighbors, and we've been good neighbors, but we can't do it forever, and it's a tremendous amount of money. And why should we have a $200 billion deficit and add on to that many, many other things that we give them in terms of subsidy? And I said, that's okay to have if you're a state.
President-elect Trump will be sworn into office on January the 20th. Is he really serious about making Canada the 51st U.S. state?
Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire him?
No. Economic force. Because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada.
Is he for real? Is he just bluffing? Can he really do that? What is going on here? I'm David Smith, and this is The Big Story. And my guest today is Professor Ian Lee. Professor Lee is Associate Professor of Management at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University in Ottawa. Hi, Professor. Thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure, David. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Donald Trump referring to Canada as the 51st U.S. state. What do you make of that? Do you think he is being serious?
No, I don't. Trump, it's very fashionable, and I've read many pundits saying he's an idiot, he's a moron, he doesn't know what he's saying, what comes out of his mouth, he doesn't have a clue, he says clueless, he's completely confused. I think he's crazy like a fox. I think he's doing this very deliberately. I think it's very deliberate. He's not an intellectual, we all know that, but then neither is Justin Trudeau, and most politicians are not intellectuals, and nor should they or need to be intellectuals. I'm not suggesting they should be, but they don't sit around reading, policy books and that sort of thing. But he understands how to do deals. He's been a deal maker for 50 years. And he certainly understands politics. He won the presidency twice. And so what I'm trying to say is he knows what he's doing. So now let's get to what is he doing. The relationship between Trudeau and Trump is toxic. It was toxic in the first Trump presidency, 2016 to 2020, and it's become, I would suggest strongly to you and your listeners, it's become far more toxic. And we're seeing that. And I'm not trying to blame this all on Trudeau. Let me be very clear. There's no question that Trump is saying things he shouldn't be saying, in my judgment. However, Mr. Trudeau, unfortunately, in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, rose 2 weeks, I guess, and took the bait. And he should never have done that when he said that the government, the people of the United States, quote, unfortunately, made the wrong decision. It is never the role of prime ministers and presidents to comment about the election outcomes of other democracies.
Okay. So you're saying that it's Donald Trump's musings, this I call it an insult. It's insulting to Canadians to suggest that we ought to be a state. So this is a political retaliation from Trump based on comments that Trudeau made that many Americans took to be disparaging about how they voted in the last election. You think it's a political retaliation?
Oh, I think it's gone. For those who say it started, for those who say, Ian, it didn't start there. It doesn't matter. It didn't start there. I agree. Yes, Trump started it. Yes, so what? What this proves, David, what this proves is those people in the progressive community, and there are op-eds, including Peter Donolo, 2 days ago in the Star, saying we got to, step into the ring, mano a mano, and go, and punch him in the face, and all this, what I call progressive, toxic masculinity. And instead, we've got to use our brains, not our brawn, our brains, our intelligence, and say, we have to deal with this situation. We may not like it. We may not like the president. His name may be Richard Nixon. It may be Ronald Reagan. It may be Donald Trump. It doesn't matter. The job of the prime minister is to surmount those challenges. And that is where Mr. Trudeau completely failed.
Okay, let me jump in there. So let's look at some of the claims that Donald Trump was making on Tuesday when he spoke with the media in Mar-a-Lago, sort of clarifying, why he was asked why he wants Canada to be a state. Why are you saying this, Mr. Trump? And his reasoning, to break it down, was economic. He made some claims. For example, he believes that the trade imbalance between Canada and the U.S. amounts to a, quote, subsidy. He thinks the U.S. is subsidizing the Canadian economy. Is that accurate?
No, and yes, and no. Let me explain that. We are so integrated. We were integrated before NAFTA. In fact, if you look at the history of the last, throughout the 19th century, Canada's most successful partner was the UK. And then starting, I have to go back and look at my own records of the data. Starting in the late 1800s, the US surpassed UK and became the most important partner to Canada. That relationship has only become deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper ever since. What NAFTA did was NAFTA crystallized and codified that dependency or relationship. And so we're codependent. I'm not a psychologist, but that's a word we all hear from psychology. We are codependent. Okay, so what I think he's saying, and I do not pretend to have any private pipeline to Mr. Trump or the people around him, but I think he's really making reference to the protected industries that the USTR, United States Trade Rep, who files a report to Congress every year, and it's a very public report, it's not secret, and since the 90s, since the Bill Clinton presidency, they have listed the trade and relationship irritants from the U.S. point of view with Canada. And they put them in black and white in writing. And they've said, you won't let American agriculture come into Canada, dairy products and chicken and dairy. You won't allow American telecom come into Canada. So they've got a list. They know exactly what we're doing on those protected industries. So he, I think, is claiming that that's the subsidy, that we are being subsidized by being able to protect their own industries from competition. I'm sympathetic to the argument. I don't believe in subsidies and protecting any industry. I hope we get rid of them because it only exploits Canadian consumers. But if you're asking me in a larger sense, if we had to do an accounting of the Canadian and American, balance sheet of our relationship, it's probably even, Stephen.
The narrative, Professor, that Trump is pushing here to the American people, to his supporters, is that the current Canada-U.S. trade relationship is bad for America, bad for American people.
Yes.
Is there any truth? Is there any truth to that?
I don't believe that. I do not believe that because, again, when you look at the exports, for example, the largest single export is not automobiles. As if you talk to anybody in Southern Ontario in the automobile industry, you would walk away believing the only thing we export, or probably the only thing we export, are cars. That is so far from the truth. Oil and gas has always been, and electricity has always massively surpassed the export of autos. We are massively competitive, and the Americans need Canada for oil and gas and electricity. Big time. The cars, I did a paper on the auto industry several years ago, and I showed in it, I tried to show that we've never been really competitive in automobiles that the Americans did us a big favor in 1965 when Lyndon Johnson negotiated Auto Pact with Pearson. It was to save the auto industry in Canada. And then we did free trade in 88 and NAFTA in 92, 93. And some would argue, and I'm one of them, that one of the driving forces for that was to save the Canadian automobile yet again, because we have never been as competitive as the Americans. But automobiles is only a small part. Manufacturing is only 12% of GDP of Canada. We are very competitive in energy. We are very competitive in exports. We export very large amounts of agricultural products to the United States. We export very large amounts of services. So what I'm trying to say is I think we have a very solid relationship, a very good economic relationship. I hope that what comes out of all this bad, toxic relationship or dialogue or discourse, I hope is that we accelerate the negotiation of a new NAFTA, a new CUSMA, which is scheduled for 2026 next year. I hope that we move that forward. I can't see it happening under Mr. Trudeau so long as he's there because the toxicity between the two. But once we have an election and we have a new prime minister, I think that the only solution going forward is not to, as Peter Donelot and some other liberals are saying, let's go into the ring and, we're going to take them on man to man and mano a mano, which is as idiotic as a person who's in pee-wee hockey saying he wants to take on the biggest, strongest, baddest NHL enforcer, because we're a fraction of the U.S. They are the world superpower, 28 trillion GDP. We are 2.5 trillion. Pierre Trudeau got it right. He said, they're the elephant and we're the mouse. The elephant catches a cold and sneezes, and the mouse catches pneumonia. He understood the profound imbalance in power between the two countries. That's why we cannot get into a trade war with the United States.
You said at the start you don't think Donald Trump seriously wishes Canada was not a sovereign nation, do you?
I think that there's a lot of bluster going on right now because of his deep anger and dislike and contempt for Justin Trudeau. I think that the whole relationship will change profoundly once we have an election and we have a different prime minister. It could be a different Liberal prime minister. It might be Carney. I think it'll be Poilievre, but it could be Carney. I think that it will change the entire language and relationship. I think that this is a lot of this is his way of, getting back at Trudeau. I think there's a lot of personal animus and animosity here. And I do not believe he's going to try to annex Canada or acquire us through economic means. Our relationships go back too far and they're too deep with the border states, with the border governors. And I don't believe that that's I don't believe that's his objective. Now, is he softening us up for the negotiations for the next CUSMA? Yes, I do believe that, because if anybody, more journalists and critics of Trump should go read his damn book, The Art of the Deal. He fancies himself a wheeler, dealer, deal maker. It's very clear he sees himself as a deal maker. Why don't we work on that and say, you know what, Mr. Trump, you're a deal maker. You're a wheeler, dealer, deal maker. We want to do a deal with you. We want to negotiate a deal. I think he would be very, very receptive because, he wrote the book. He didn't write a book called The Art of Insults. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. And a trade deal is as big a deal as one can ever get between two sovereign countries. In fact, the largest economy in the world and the 10th or 11th largest economy in the world. It's in our interest to go down that road. I do believe he's going to put the tariffs on when he goes into office, because Trudeau's still the prime minister.
Yeah.
And they're going to be there. As long as Trudeau's prime minister, those tariffs will be there. I have no doubt about that. I only own a house in this world. That's the only asset I have in this world. I'd bet my house that those tariffs will be there as long as Justin Trudeau is the prime minister of Canada.
Let's talk about those tariffs. Let's talk about the leverage in the deal making, as you point out. What happens to the Canadian economy if there's a 25% tariff on all goods exported to the U.S.?
Well, it's going to be devastating. No, we will not vanish. Of course not. But it will be devastating. The analyses I've seen, serious econometric analyses, is there'll be 2 to 5% decline in GDP, which is a very serious recession. It's not a depression. In the Great Depression, it was 30% decline in GDP. We've never seen it before, and we've never seen it since, an economic decline of that magnitude in the 1930s. But will 2 to 5% decline in GDP will be catastrophic? Yes, it'll be horrible. And I argue, David, that we've been so focused on the tariffs, most people, pundits and analysts and journalists and MPs and politicians and everybody, they've missed, forgive me for being, I don't mean to sound arrogant, but they've missed the point. I mean, yes, the tariffs are devastating, but, there's lots of Canadians who can say, well, hey, I don't work in the auto industry. Ian Lee doesn't work. I'm a professor. David, you're a journalist. You don't work in the auto industry. Big deal. That's not the point. What the tariffs will do is that the currency markets will instantaneously, no lag, no 6-month lag, the moment he signs those tariffs, it will crash the Canadian dollar. Crash the Canadian dollar. And that will drive up the cost of imports, and we import 1/3 of GDP. That's $1 trillion. And we all buy imported goods, even all of us that don't work in the automotive industry. We buy fruit and vegetables. We buy John Deere tractors. We buy laptops. We buy clothing. We buy everything. Anything you see. And even the goods we don't buy from the States are affected because all the other currencies of the world, including the Chinese RMB and all the stuff you see or much of the stuff you see at Walmart and Home Depot, etc., comes from China. Well, the RMB, the Chinese currency, is affected mightily by the US dollar. So my point being that if the dollar crashes, the Canadian dollar crashes, it's going to have a brutal impact on everybody in the whole country, whether you work in automobiles or in manufacturing or not. That's the bigger story of tariffs is not just the impact on manufactured goods. Manufacturing is only 12% of GDP. But it's going to affect 100% of Canadians in every industry because everybody buys imported stuff. And so crashing the dollar with the tariffs, will crash the dollar and will cause unbelievable suffering and will drive up the inflation rate, which paradoxically is going to force the Bank of Canada to increase the interest rate to try to defend the dollar from further depreciation and further rate increases. This is the classic dilemma of many developing countries. Argentina's faced this crisis repeatedly, where the peso goes down, and then they have to drive up the interest rates. Russia is going through this as I speak. They've driven the central bank rate up to 23% because the ruble was collapsing. And again, it was driving inflation through the roof. So this is the catastrophic impact of the tariffs. It's not the fact that we'll sell a hell of a lot less auto parts and cars to the U.S., which is a very small part of GDP. The impact will be through the exchange rate.
Okay.
And that is devastating.
Okay, one more question for you. Some of the commentary coming out of this is along the lines of, if Donald Trump wants to play this way, if he wants to insult us, if he wants to muse about taking away our sovereignty, about annexing Canada, making it a state, well, then Canada should really just be looking elsewhere for trading partners. We should diversify and we should not be reliant on the U.S. for such a large part of our trade-related GDP. How realistic is that line of thinking?
It's completely unrealistic, and I have data to back me up. In 1970, I was still in late high school, very late high school. I think it was in my final year. Pierre Trudeau, it was 70 or 71, released a very, very famous pink paper, white paper, green paper. I can't remember the color of the paper. Doesn't matter. It was called The Third Way. And we've been talking, and probably before Pierre Trudeau, I just don't remember that. But before that, we've been talking for 3/4 of a century about diversification away from U.S. And we haven't. In fact, our dependency on the U.S. has gone up every year in that 70 years. It didn't go down, went up. And so I became curious about this and looked at this over the last few years, just because I've got lots of time as a professor and I can go look up all kinds of data trends. And then I was teaching in Poland and I found out, guess who Poland's largest trading partner is? Germany. Why? Because Germany and Poland share a border. They're smack side by side with each other. So then I looked at other countries. Who do they trade the most with? The countries that are right next door. Why? Because you have long histories. Argentina has a long history with Brazil and Chile. Poland has a long, long history with Germany. and so on. Germany with France. So, to say that you should go 10,000, I've heard this from serious people. Look, we got to go 10,000 miles around the world. Well, where else? The U.S. is the largest economy in the world. China is the second largest economy in the world. We signed a trade agreement with Europe, which I strongly supported, by the way. And we're now up to, I think it's $30 billion a year, which is a drop in the bucket. It's a rounding error when you compare it to our trade with the U.S. So the barriers, here's what I'm trying to say. It's not that it's illegal. It's not that it's impossible. The barriers to trading with a region that's halfway around the world that speaks a completely different language often, okay, their home language is not English, even though they may speak English. China's first language is not English. We all know that. It's Mandarin. And so the barriers, the law, the legal laws, the distances, the logistical challenges are such that it's vastly, vastly easier to deal with a country that is literally 60 kilometers or 100 kilometers down the road. It's the same reason why Poland deals so extensively with Germany. It's just a few kilometers away. And most Poles, especially on the western side of Poland, speak German. And so it's pardon my word, this word, I love this word, propinquity. Propinquity means closeness. It's a big fancy word for being close. And there was somebody in the Kennedy administration who was very funny, a witty guy. He said, nothing propinques like propinquity. To translate that, nothing is better to get close than being close. That's what he was saying. In other words, when you're next door to the largest economy in the world, and they speak the same language, they have very similar laws because they're both English, established by English common law country called UK. And we have so much in common. We share the same time zones, north-south. We have a common energy grid. We have so much in common between the two countries. We even watch all their American media and American movies and American sitcoms. That to say, well, let's go 10,000 miles away to a country that doesn't have any of this in common with us, and we're going to develop a better relationship, it's just dreaming. It is dreaming. It's not realistic. It's not credible. We've signed trade agreements around the world, by the way, and they have not taken off anything close to our trade agreement with the United States over the last, whether you look at it 10 years, 30 years, 50 years, or 100 years. And I believe that will continue as long as I'm alive and my children and my grandchildren are alive, because they're right next door.
Okay. So to tie a bow on it for today, Professor, I don't need to go and convert my savings to U.S. dollars. No, Donald Trump is not going to make Canada into a U.S. state. Is that fair to say?
I believe he will not.
Okay.
I believe that once we have an election, I deeply believe that once we have an election and a change in government, which could be a new Liberal government under Carney, I'm not ruling that out. I don't want anyone to think that I'm secretly saying, well, he's just shilling for Pierre Poilievre. I think Poilievre will get in because of the polls. They're saying that. He's 25 points ahead. But maybe Carney will become the leader. Maybe I believe that the relationship with the United States is going to change profoundly after the next election, for the better.
Professor Ian Lee, thank you very much for your time today. It's a great pleasure to have you as our guest.
Thanks very much, David. A real pleasure speaking with you.
And again, that was Professor Ian Lee, Associate Professor of Management at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. We thank him for his time today. That was The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode of the show. Email us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. We really love hearing from you. You can find the show on the Seeker app or on any other of your favorite podcast platforms. Please rate, review, follow, and share. I'm David Smith. Thank you for listening.